Hey, what is going on guys? This is Eli from MOBOX Graphics, and in this video we are going to take a look at how to recreate the effect which is made by Gleb Kuznetsov on Dribbble. He's the master of this style, I have to say, and our result will not be exactly the same, but I just wanted to figure out a fast way to replicate the main style of this. So let's get started in Cinema 4D. The first thing we are going to do is adding a cube object. After that we can create a cloner for this and drag the cube inside of it. Now let's go to the Cloner its object tab, and we're going to set the mode to grid array. Let's change the size of the grid array because now all the cubes are intersecting with each other. So let's go with something like 3000 centimeters on the first field and the last field. Now let's zoom out, and we're going to increase the amount of clones. So let's go with 10 on each side, except for the middle value, because that will go up and we only want buildings on the floor. So 1 on that one and 10 on the last one. So now we have a bunch of cubes. Let's turn these into some kind of buildings. So with the cloner selected, let's go back to mograph, effector, and add the random effector. You can see things are shifting around. So let's go in the parameter tab, and we're going to change the position to something more random even. So let's go for 150 centimeters on the x-axis, but once again we don't want it to go up or down, so let's change the y value to 0. And the last one can also be something like 150 centimeters. So now this is a bit more randomly distributed over the space. Let's go ahead and also enable the scaling option. We're going to do this randomly as well. So for this it's a bit different. We're just going to do this with very small values, but just try to find something that looks right. Okay, so now we have these buildings. Now we can also add a floor to this, but as you may notice and already know, it is not visible in the viewport. So let's add a plane object as well, which will be the placeholder for the floor. And we're just going to hide this from the render view by double clicking this bottom dot. That way it will only show in the viewport, but not in the final render. So this is our basic city. Now we want to have some kind of road which is exactly in the middle of the city. But there are too many buildings there. So we need some kind of way to disable the cloners that are in the center of the cloner object. So what you can do is go into the cloner and selecting that, and go to mograph and select the mograph selection tool. Now when you click and drag with this one, you can also scale this up of course with the radius. You can just drag over the parts that should be hidden. Now when you've done this, you may not really notice anything just yet, except for the colors of the dots being changed. So to actually hide these, we need to go to mograph again, go to the effector submenu, and we're going to select a plane effector. But before clicking on this, you also want to hold Alt or Option on the keyboard while doing this, so it is a parent of the cloner. So now with the plane effector still selected, we can already disable the position because we don't want to change any positioning on this. We just want to change the visibility of this all. So let's click on the visibility checkmark. And now finally, to get the full effect of this, we need to go to the min and max values of the effector tab, and we're going to change the maximum value to something lower. And that way you can see it hides the clones we selected. So this isn't perfect just yet. So let's go back to this mograph selection tag that has been automatically created. And now with the brush again, we can hold Shift to add more to this. But you may notice this not working just yet, and that is because we need to select the cloner object as well. Now we can add more buildings to this while holding Shift, and there we go. I guess this is big enough for the road. Now we're going to create the lines that were representing the car lights. So the easiest way to do this is just using the pen tool, and maybe go to the top view or something. And I'm going to draw a first point here, and a second one right there. And just hit escape to exit the spline mode. So now we can go ahead and add a circle spline to this. This one can be very small, something like this. And we're going to add a sweep object where we can drag both of these splines inside of it. Let's take a look at the perspective view again. And of course we need to raise this up. You can see it is flat, so let's go back to the circle and change the plane of this on a different axis. So in this case it needs to be X and Y. We can also make this one even smaller, something like this. Okay, so now we have that. let's create 3 more. So we have 2 tail lights and 2 front lights. Something like this will do. And the final thing before we can go ahead and start adding textures and light is setting up the camera. So I'm just going to create a camera object and look through it. And let's set the focal length to something like 80 millimeters to have a bit more miniature effect. And I'm just going to position this somewhere randomly to get the effect of what we saw on the image. I think something like this will look nice. Now let's get started with creating the material for the sweep objects. So create a new material, and we're going to disable the color channel and add a luminance channel. For this, the color can be some kind of yellow, and we're also going to increase the intensity of this to something like 120, for example. We're also going to add a glow effect on this to make it look nicer. The outer strength shouldn't be this big because it's just a very small spline. So let's set this to 100% instead of 500%. And all the rest is okay as it is. Now, if we would apply this to the sweep, it would be just a full line, but you could see it had these kind of gaps in between them. So how we can fake this effect is enabling the alpha channel. And we're going to add a texture to this, which will be a gradient. Let's go inside of the gradient, and we're just going to create a bunch of black and white points. So we have the black point first, so that's okay. Let's create a second one here. Make sure it's black. You could even just hold Command or Control and copy these. So let's create a second one here and a third one there. And now we're going to grab the white one and copy that just in front of each of one of the black ones. So now we have this kind of pattern. So let's close this. And we're going to apply this to one of the sweeps so we can take a look if it looks fine. And you can see the alpha is happening on the midsection of the sweep, so not in the right direction. So what we need to do is changing the projection from UVW mapping to something like cubic. Now let's render to see if this is looking alright, and it still isn't. So if this effect is also happening for you, you can go ahead and select the circle maybe and change the plane back to XZ and take a look again, or try ZY. And you can see that one is a bit better. So let's just keep it like that for now. I'm not sure why this is happening, it worked just fine a minute ago. But let's just continue because we are far away and it will look just fine anyway. So I'm going to add this one as well on the second one. And also adjust the circle to this. And now we're going to make an alternative version of this texture. So we're just going to change the color of this on the luminance channel, of course. This time we are going for the taillights, so something a bit more reddish. So now let's create the material for the building. We're going to change the color to some kind of very dark blue. And let's go to the reflectance channel to add the reflections on this. We are going to add a backmill layer on this. And just increase the roughness to something like 12 or 10%. And down here we have layer Fresnel. And we're going to change this to dielectric. That way it should be just fine out of the box. So let's add this to the cloner with the buildings. And we're also going to add this to the floor object. Now we don't have something that will reflect on the buildings, so there will not be a lot to look at just yet. So let's go to the render settings, and we're going to start by enabling the global illumination option. And maybe while we are at it, we can also enable the glow option. For this one we can keep everything at default settings. Now let's get started by adding some lights to this. So our first thing we can do is creating a sphere. And this one can be, let's say, a bit larger than the city. And we're going to create a new material for this, where we disable every channel except for the luminance channel, which will make the sphere emit light. We're going to increase the brightness of this to something like 150%. And we're also going to give this a bit more of a blue tone. Okay, so let's drag this on the sphere. And we're going to move it at the back side of the city. So the camera is looking at it from this way. So let's move the sphere to this side. Maybe raise it up a bit also. Now we have reflections from that side. But we also want some reflections on the roof, and there's nothing above this. So what I did to create some more random reflections instead of just a solid color is creating a plane object. And we're going to scale this up a lot. Like so. So it's bigger than the city. And now let's increase the segments of this to something more like 50 on each side. And we can make this editable. Let's also go to our display settings and enable some lines so we can see what is going on. And in the polygon mode, we can just use the selection tool and randomly draw over it to create some random lines of selections. If this is still too big, you can hold your middle mouse button or change the radius down here. And maybe you also want to go to the top view. And now just randomly scribble over this. So I think this is okay. Now we want to make this a bit smoother because we don't want any sharp reflections like this corner, for example. So let's just hold Alt while clicking this button to create a subdivision surface that holds the plane as a child of it. And we're going to create a new luminance material for this. So let's disable everything else and just keep the luminance. We are going to increase the brightness to 150% again. And this one can be even more blue. So let's drag this on top of there. And now we should be sure it is above the city, so higher. But we're also going to move this a bit more to the back side of this, so the back corner maybe. You can also create some copies of this to have a bigger area, so we are sure everything will get some reflections. And I think I'm also going to create one more right here and just angle this at the city so we have something coming from that side as well. So let's take a look at this so far. So you can see we have some of the floor showing in the back. So in this case it would be just easier to move the camera so we can see what is in the back. But the most important thing is that we have the reflections on the roof. And they are not exactly the same on every roof. But you can also notice the buildings are very dark. You cannot even see the shape of it. So let's start with just moving the camera a bit. Like this maybe. Or just a bit more like that. So we have some roofs. And we're also going to add a sky object, so it is dark at the background as well. So just change the color to black and drag that on the sky. One more thing we want to do is adding that more light. So let's create an infinite light, and by default it should be pointing towards the buildings. So let's just change the intensity to something like 8%. You can also hide this in the viewport so things stay a bit more visible. And for the color, let's just make it a bit blue. So that should be a bit better. Now let's go to the render settings again, and we're going to change this to physical. That way under the physical options you can turn on the depth of field. And let's go to the camera options. And we're going to set the f-stop to something like 2 in this case, because this is quite a small scene, or maybe let's go for 1. And we're going back to the object tab so we can go to focus distance and click this arrow so we can just select what we want in focus. Okay, so now comes the most difficult part, at least for me, so I had to figure this out. I wanted a fast way to create some kind of windows on the buildings without subdividing them and manually selecting polygons where we apply materials on. I wanted something more automatic. So let's go and create a new material. For now we can make the color some kind of bright red or anything that is bright, so it is easier to see what is going on. And we can enable the luminance as well, so that will be the actual color. It's up to you what kind of color you give the windows. We will have some multiple variations on this anyway. We can also bump up the intensity of this. We can also enable the glow for this again, but let's change the outer strength to 100% and the size of this or the radius to 5 centimeters. Maybe the luminance is just a bit too strong, so I'm going to 150%. So that should be it. But first we need to go to alpha to create random patterns. So in this case we're going to create a new texture again. This one will be a pixel effect actually. So let's go to, I think, effects, and there we have pixel. Let's click on this, and in here we can add the noise shader. Let's click on that to open this. And now I will just drag this on the cloner. Like this, so you can see the pixels are happening, but not like we want them, of course. So with the tag enabled, let's change the projection again from UVW mapping to cubic. That looks better, or more in proportion at least. But we still have some blurriness going on when you render this, so we don't want that. The easiest way to fix this is changing the noise to something more pixelated, Luckily it has this, so change it to, for example, cell noise. And we're also going to change the space of this from texture to UV 2D. Now we have this going on, so those are way too many windows. What we can do is also starting by making this a bit smaller, so for example the global scale of 50%. And we're going to increase the contrast of this, so we don't have any grays, just on or off, so black is hidden, white is shown. And we're going to increase the low clip as well. That way we have less white ones. And you can see we have less and less windows. So you can go up quite high for this one. Also make sure to make an actual render to see if this is going right. So it appears to be fine. But these are still a bit big and still a bit much. So let's go all the way to 99 maybe. I think that is better. And you can also go back to the pixel shader. And with the tiles option, you can make these a different size or a different proportion. So that makes them wider. Okay, that looks fine, but we want them smaller, so let's increase once more by 10 on every side, so it keeps in proportion. I think that looks nice, but you can see there are more of them now. So maybe you could even go to 0.5%, I'm not sure if that works. Yes, it does, so that's good. So that's our first one. Let's create a duplicate of this material, and you're just going to start off with overriding the luminance value. Let's go with something more red, for example, but less bright, so a bit more moody. And under the alpha channel we can also make some changes, because now this would just override the values of the other ones. So let's go inside of here, and there are two options. We keep this one and we just change the seed of this to get a random pattern, or you can change to another pixel noise, which is mod noise. And this one will give less of the windows, so it's a bit more easy to control. So we don't need the low clipping to be up that high. We can go to somewhere closer to 60 or 50. Hey, Eli from the future here. In the following clip of this video, I was trying to make an alternative pattern for the windows by using a different noise shader. So I switched from cell noise to mod noise. But one thing I forgot to do when applying this material to the cloner was switching the projection from UVW mapping to cubic. So because of that I was struggling to keep the windows in proportion, they were really stretched. And I didn't figure it out in time while recording the video, so that is why I'm trying to tell you this after the damage is done. Anyway, you're free to use the cell noise or the mod noise. The cell noise needs more extreme values, like the low clip needs to be at 99%, while the mod noise only needs to be around 60%, for example. So it's up to you which one you use, but just make sure the projection is set to cubic, otherwise it will not work. So lastly, we are going to create one more alternative version of this. So let's start with the first one. I think that one looked the best. So go in there, in the noise, change the seed, just to be sure. And we're going to go for something like 99 in this case, so we have a bit more. And we're going to disable the luminance maybe for this one, and just have some kind of grayish blue color. That are the basics. It's mostly fine-tuning, because you can notice it is not perfect right away. I should play around with the values a bit more to make it look just right. Last thing we can notice is that the roofs have lights on them, so that's not very realistic. We can do that by going to the cloner, but first, before making this editable, I advise to remove the materials on this, just drag them up or something on a placeholder. Now we can make this cloner editable. Right click, select children, right click again, and connect objects and delete. So now we have just one object which holds all the cubes. Let's go to the top view so we can select all the polygons at the top. Okay, that worked. Now we can invert this by pressing U and I on the keyboard. And let's go to select, set selection, and we get this tag. Now we can drag the materials back on this. Otherwise, if we wouldn't have done this, we would have all duplicate materials. So now with these three last ones selected, we can drag the selection tag on this selection field. So it limits itself to just the selection and not the roofs. Okay, so now I'm going to take one last look at the bottom here, what is going on. So these appear to be working a bit more like we want them to. It's kind of strange it doesn't work like it should be. And you see we have these stripes, but they're just next to each other. I think it looks a bit more interesting if we have an offset on that one. So select the texture tag of this, and with the offset value you should be able to move them like you want them to. Maybe you can also scale them up to give it a bit more length. So we can also do that on the other one. So that will be the same thing on the other ones. I'm not going to waste any more time on that. So the final thing we can do is going to the camera view again, making sure everything is selected in the render settings we originally had, and then just render to the picture viewer. Because that way we can also add a filter to this, and it would be a nice way to add more of an exposure, a bit more saturation or less saturation, and a bit more brightness, and that way it would be easier to get a bit closer to the original image. Okay, so that is all I have for this one. I know it was a bit messy, but that is because I'm recording this tutorial in between very large projects. So in other words, I'm in a big hurry, but I want to create some video for you. So I will make sure I upload a cleaner version of this on the Patreon page, where everything just works. So I still hope you learned something from this one, and I hope to see you in the next video.